everyone. Hope this finds you healthy and happy. Going to take a few minutes to hopefully interrupt your Netflix binge and go through a little running form. We've got a 1-year-old, almost 2-year-old running around here, so had to squeeze this into a nap time. There's no Netflix binging in this household. But they say you're not supposed to begin a presentation with an apology, but I'm going to anyway. When we first decided to do the virtual camp, I had all kinds of ideas to make an awesome video and for different ways that we could film this. But here it is Wednesday, and I just want to get some information to you so we can chat about it on Saturday. So my apologies. I apologize. You're not getting the full Grant Robinson professional video. You're getting the COVID quarantine nap time in the basement bunker with a made up makeshift backdrop and all that kind of video. So the content will still be good, and so we'll stick with that. But yeah, we're going to kind of go through a couple different things. The hard thing about this is I'm used to doing this interactively, not staring at the back of my phone. But it'll be good. I'll share some information. I don't want to overload you on a YouTube video. Not that the information is so difficult or really all that hard to understand. But in many cases, it's just easier to walk through it with you and answer questions as they come and kind of go through it all together. So we'll be able to tackle that. Maybe we can answer some questions on the call on Saturday. But for now, I want to just get you started, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later. But unfortunately, some of the most important things that we can cover are the foundational type things that aren't all that flashy or sexy. It's pretty much back to basics and really focusing on body position and just core strength and some of the real nuts and bolts that you probably already know. But there's some ways to think about it and some ways to remember it, and maybe some different ways to approach it that you haven't already. So let's do it. Let's go. Starters, why is running form important? Well, it seems like kind of a silly question, but it's not. I would say it's important for a number of reasons. It's important because we love to do it for a variety of individual reasons, whether that's spend time with friends and social environment, whether it's just a point of daily sanity to get outside and breathe some outdoor air, whether it's a chance for us to listen to some music during the day, spend some time with ourselves, our thoughts, whatever the case may be, we love to do it. That's why we're here. That's why we're talking about it. But like with anything, if you don't necessarily do it in an efficient way or try to make it as efficient as you can, it does start to wear out the parts. Even when you do it super efficiently, we age and our muscles start to go away and our bone density starts to decrease and all that good stuff. So we're gonna wear the parts out anyway, but it's pretty incredible how long our parts will last if we treat them and align them in a good way. So that's really what running form comes down to, is trying to maximize the efficiency in our movements. And when we don't do that, you see what we see. We see tons of bad knees. We see Achilles and plantar and hips and knees and all the bad things that happen when we run and we're not in the most efficient position that our body could be in, and in a way that would maximize the longevity of our knees and our joints and all the other parts that tend to break down. So that's really the crux of what we want to cover in terms of the why. One question that comes up, or at least should be asked, is why don't we talk about this more? And I think I'll kind of address some of the counter arguments, I guess, and the disagreements with running form. But I would say one of the main reasons we don't talk about it more is it seems to just be one of those things that you just feel like you know how to do. You figure out how to walk when you're 1-2 years old, and hopefully by the time you're 2, but sometime between 1 and 2, And from there you learn how to run, and you don't really look back. It's kind of an obvious thing. Yeah, I know how to run. Um, so we don't really revisit it. We don't necessarily revisit how we hold a pencil, or maybe we do in elementary school, but there's just certain things that we learn, and we put it in the back of our brain, and we just go for it. And running and walking and moving seems to be one of those things. Um, However, it's a pretty complex movement when you think about it and when you start to look at all the different parts of it. Um, and over time, and with the added piece of footwear, and just all these different environmental variables that we add into the equation, we end up kind of neglecting some of the obvious movement needs, and we start to go down a path where our body, even though we know what we're doing, it's on autopilot, and autopilot kind of takes us down a path where we're not as efficient as we could be, or as we once were. But I think it's not talked about as much for that reason of, like, we're on autopilot and we already know how to run, so no need spending a half hour talking about it more. But my suggestion would be that it is important. I like to kind of analyze and counter-analyze everything, but especially with running. If it's something that's so important to us and something that's so valuable to our daily or weekly or monthly life, I want to make sure that we can continue to do that and do so healthily, and not be damaging our body in the process. So I would say it does need to be talked about, and that's why we're going to spend a few minutes addressing it. In terms of just some of the disagreements, or I don't even know what I want to call it that, but some of the pushback on, no, I don't want to change my running form. I don't need to talk about running form. I would say one of the main reasons for that is what I just alluded to, is change is hard. We're resistant to change. Changing your running form isn't as easy as it might seem. When I'll walk through some pretty simple things, but it's simple to say it, it's easier said than done, sort of thing. It's really difficult in a lot of respects to change how you move, especially when you've been doing a certain thing for so many years, and that those movement and that muscle memory is really embedded deep. To change that, to shift that, can be quite difficult. And I guess another reason people would push back on it maybe a little bit is that there is such a variety of body shapes and types that it's difficult to come at it and say, these are the things that you need to do with your body to run more efficiently, when there's so many different bodies and different backgrounds and histories and injuries and everything that goes on the back side and backstage of everyone's running life. So to just come up with 3 steps or the couple things that I'm going to talk about today and say they're universal can be a little bit tough to swallow. I think we'll go through it, and you can kind of make that judgment for yourself, but I think there's some certain things that, regardless of your injury history or running history or background or your body type or anything like that, these are pretty universal principles that it's more a conscious, a call to consciousness than really trying to enforce, you have to land on your foot this way and you have to do this and that. That's really not realistic. That's not real life. That's not the world we live in. So I think the things that we're going to talk about are more philosophical, really. I don't want to be too fluffy, but they're really, like I said, triggers or things to get you thinking about your movement and your bodies in ways that maybe you haven't, or maybe you have, and these will just be reinforcements to that. So with just balls is to show, yeah, there are a lot of different ways to move, but there are some really efficient ways that we can shoot for. For example, a football. We can move a football and it will move forward if you add a little force to it. It continues to move, maybe not in the most efficient way, but if you keep adding force to it, it'll keep going. I've got a box, which kind of illustrates one end of the spectrum of movement and inefficiencies. You got corners and edges, but even a box, if I apply force to it, I can move it forward, right? Figured emergency was fitting for this, but But yeah, like the box will move. It might not roll super well. There's going to be a lot of surface friction, or I can just flip it and it slides and it flips along. And if I kept applying force to it, I could keep it moving. As opposed to a ball, which is a super efficient physical object, I don't have to apply hardly any force, and it's going to carry on in a really efficient way for a really extended period of time. Well, there are a lot of different ways that you can move forward. It's ideal to try to get your body to move as much like a ball as possible and as little like a box as possible. And I guess that would be the point that I would want to make is with any individual and any background is there's certain things you can do to improve your efficiency. It doesn't have to be perfect. None of us are going to be perfect. And even through the course of a single run, your fatigue is going to become a factor, and your body and your movements will change even within a 20-minute run. And this is really regardless of speed or pace or anything like that. As you get tired, it doesn't matter how fast you're running or whether you're a world record holder or brand new to running, your mechanics will start to break down, your body tires, and you have to be cognizant of that to be able to make the adjustments to keep your body moving efficiently. So a couple of things I want to walk through are a couple of those just friendly reminders when you're out there, and just some different ways that you can think about your position and your stride and what you're doing with your body to make it a little more efficient. So the first step we want to talk about is posture. And posture is one of those not super exciting things, but it is one of those fundamental things that if you don't have good posture, if you don't have good alignment to begin with or to even start thinking about, then it's really difficult to do all the things in motion and to really move very efficiently. So the hardest part about posture is just being aware of it. I know I slouch, but I don't always think about it, and over time I catch myself, I'm slouching again, and I have to correct it. With running, really the kicker for posture, slouching is obviously bad in any form of movement, stationary or anything, right? Slouching is just bad. But with running, really the key point of posture and positioning is at your hips. So one thing that we really want to be aware of and think about is keeping our hip alignment and keeping our posture all stacked up on top of each other so that your body can be efficient. So that when it comes in contact with the ground, it can take that impact and that movement and efficiently move your body back forwards. So a couple ways to think about this and a couple ways to check it and just be aware of it is to kind of start with all the varieties of posture. So typically when you run, you're going to start off running, and over time you're going to fatigue and your butt's going to start to drift behind you. It's going to fall behind, and you're going to start to sit down into your stride. So instead of running really tall, you're just going to kind of get tired and sit into your stride. So we want to get out of that. Which can be really difficult. There's an easy way I'm going to show you in a second. Put your arms over your head. But a lot of that has to do with hip flexors and lower back and glutes firing and all these other things that it's kind of tricky to think about on that piece by piece level. So I've borrowed a little trick that I learned in yoga back when I used to do yoga on a regular basis. Many of you probably do yoga, but it's been around for thousands of years, and one of the things that I think, at least one of the things that stuck with me, is they'll do just kind of they'll do like a sun salute or whatever they call it, but they'll do a reset, which really resets your posture. So we can try this. So go ahead, we'll make this as interactive as possible. Go ahead and stand up, and then just put your body in a really slouchy, bad position. And then all we're going to do is reach our hands as high up to the ceiling as we can. So give it a good stretch. And then without moving the rest of your body that you just positioned really well, just bring your arms down. And you're in a much better lined up position. So again, just slouchy, reset it, give it a good stretch. And you're in a really aligned position. So just by reaching over your head, it will naturally pull your hips forward. It rotates your pelvis back underneath of your torso. By reaching up, it will naturally kind of pull your shoulders to the side and back a little bit. You can't really touch the ceiling with your shoulders in front. It like opens up your chest, puts everything in a really natural anatomical position, which is really good for movement, really good for any sporting, any sort of sport or movement or exercise or activity, or just sitting at your desk or anything. So this is something, we'll call it the posture reset, you can call it whatever, but this is something you really want to be practiced on. So when you're out running and you start to fatigue, you start to get sloppy, just give it a stretch up over your head, and it's going to put you back in a really upright, nice position. From an energy conservation standpoint, it basically turns you from a wet, just sloppy noodle into just a really efficient machine where your body can conserve all that energy that you're putting out there. So that's posture. What we're going to cover today is stride, and this is really the crux of running form. This is what gets a lot of airtime, if you will. It's almost like if you've read anything on running form, there's almost a need to take sides of like, oh, I'm a midfoot runner, or I run on my forefoot, or I run however I want. That's just fine. So what I kind of want to make some suggestions on is just ways that you can be aware of how you run, and you be the judge. Play around with your foot strike, play around with your stride, play around with the stuff that we'll walk through, and find what feels good. I think like I said earlier, there are ways to make yourself more ball-like, less box-like, and this is what we're talking about. Making some adjustments to how your foot interacts with the ground is really what makes the difference between a ball and a football and a box, in ways that maximize your efficiency, or maybe add some inefficiencies that maybe there's just a little bit of inefficiency in your stride, and that's fine. Or maybe there's some ways that we can tweak it to make it even more efficient. So historically, I guess one of the big pushbacks on stride is again, I run how I run. Can't really change that. And if we were together in person, I like to take people through an exercise of taking your shoes off. And right away, this shows that you run how you run, given a certain set of variables. If you run a certain way with your shoes on, and I have you take your shoes off like I am right now, you're going to move and run in a different way. Your body's going to make really instantaneous adjustments to protect itself and to put itself in a good position. So sure, you can run one way, but you got to give your body more credit than that. Your body can make adjustments. Your body can change. How I run with shoes, how I don't run with shoes. Ideally, how I don't run with shoes is really natural. It's not natural to run on concrete, and we could go way off tangent into barefoot running versus footwear running and all that. But truthfully, the adjustments that your body makes when it feels there's no more protection of a shoe anymore, it makes some really good adjustments to protect your body and your joints and everything. Some adjustments that maybe we lose when we put a big cushion on our foot, which again, shoes aren't bad. In fact, in the environment that we live in with hard pavement and concrete and all that, rocks and nails and all these other sorts of things, shoes are really good. They protect our feet. We just have to be more conscious of how we move, because when you put that midsole in between your foot and the ground, it also acts as a mental buffer in between what's happening with the ground and what's happening with your body. So we have to learn to kind of overcome that buffer and make sure we're still moving in a natural, efficient way. Quick word on shoes. Traditionally and historically, for a number of reasons, we've started to build up the heel on our footwear. And this is more of a lifestyle shoe, but it's a great example of a shoe that's got a pretty hefty heel piece on it. And again, like I said before, this serves some very functional purposes. But if we're not careful, it can also serve as getting in the way of our movement and of us being aware of what's going on the ground. And in recent years, we've moved towards, all the brands have started to create more minimal type footwear. This is a little bit older model, but this is a shoe that has less heel and puts you down more in a barefoot position, um, which like I just mentioned, it minimizes the interference between our body and that connection with what's going on when we touch the ground with our foot. Regardless of what you have on your foot or don't have on your foot, there's some certain principles that are important to keep in mind, and some certain ways that we can get there. So to kind of feel what that is, all we're going to do, and I wore very bright socks, I've got my pants rolled up for us, so all we're going to do is just balance on one foot. So if you stand up and you just want to balance on one foot, I'm barefoot, I'm on the hard concrete, so it's going to really exaggerate all these things for me. If I had a shoe on, it'd be a little easier to do some of this. So if you want to take your shoes off and go barefoot for a second, that kind of helps illustrate it. But when I'm balancing on one foot, every part of my foot is interacting with the ground. My toes are kind of gripping a little bit. My heel is certainly in contact with the ground to act as a stabilization point. The ball of my foot's really spread out, trying to stabilize my imbalances side to side. My arch is contracted, trying to stabilize. Everything is working together to try to keep my body stable. And it's funny, just like in yoga, if you don't have good posture and good alignment, it's harder to stay stable in a slouchy sitting position than it is if you're able to adjust, reset your posture. And with good posture, it's a lot easier to stabilize yourself. It's crazy. It's pretty cool. So give that a try. But when you're on one foot, which you always are when you're running, sometimes hopefully you're never on 2 feet because that means you're about to eat it. But when you're on one foot, which in running you go from one foot to being airborne to another foot and another foot. When you're on one foot, your whole foot acts together to stabilize your foot. Now you start to take any one of those parts of your foot out, and get all balanced. But if I want to be more of a 4-foot runner, and I don't let my heel interact with the ground, and I go up on my 4-foot, so just pick your heel up, use your calf, and try to be on your 4-foot, it gets a lot harder to balance. You take one of your major points of support out of there, and it's really hard to balance. Now go the other way. One of the biggest drawbacks to having that big shoe interference with the ground is it allows us to spend more time on our heel than we would without it. So when I take my 4-foot out of the equation and I just try to balance on my heel, it's near impossible to balance for any amount of time. It's very unstable. Your foot's rolling everywhere and the rest of your body is trying to adjust to catch your balance. So even though it's just a fraction of a second, when we land on our heel in our stride and we come down and hit the ground with our heel first, there's that fraction of a second where your foot's kind of rolling to find the rest of the ground. But that whole fraction of a second, your body is trying to stabilize that foot and try to control it. And those fractions of a second add up throughout 100 steps, 1,000 steps, 5 miles, 10 miles, however far you're going. Those little moments of instability start to add up to be a significant factor. And that's really those are the moments that start to add up that become an issue with knees and with Achilles and ankles and hips. Because you spend much time on your heel, it's putting your body way out of alignment. It's asking your body and your joints and your muscles and everything else to try to make up for that instability. So ideally, we want to minimize our time on our heel. We'd like to minimize as much time on our 4-foot as possible because that takes a lot of effort as well, trying to balance up on our 4-foot. Use a lot of calf and Achilles, a lot of muscle to keep you up on your 4-foot. Ideally, you want to spend more time interacting with the ground with all your foot working together. So I want to have good posture. You want to be able to come down in contact with the ground as much on your midfoot or on your whole foot as possible, so that there's not much heel skidding into the ground, but you're kind of coming in and making contact with as much of your foot as possible so that you can roll and pick it up again. So again, from a good posture standpoint, if you have good posture, it's going to be a lot easier to do this. It's really hard to have a good stride if you're in a bucket seat. So if you have good posture, you're going to want to go from one really stable position to another, to another, to another, to another, so your body is a really comfortable, stable spot. So before you try to run with that, let's start at a walking speed. So again, check your posture. Good posture, butt's not sticking out. Pull that up underneath of you. And for starters, just start walking in place. And for most people, when you walk in place, you don't immediately start going heel toe or anything or straight up onto your forefoot, right? You typically, when you walk in place, you use your whole foot, which is great. We just need to remember that when we try to put it into motion and run. And walking and running are a little different, but we can tap into some of those same principles. So when you walk in place, you're going to utilize your whole foot. And it's a little different than go ahead and just do the whole spectrum. Go up on your forefoot and walk on that. Just feel pretty stable. It wouldn't take too long before your calves start to get a little tired. But then you go the other way and try to walk on your heel. And you get just a little taste of that instability. You're able to go from one heel to the next to kind of stabilize yourself, but you feel like a box trying to stay on your feet and keep yourself balanced. As opposed to you go back to your midfoot and you feel super stable. You could walk like this for hours, days, weeks, right? You can keep this going for a long time without unnecessarily taxing any part of your body. And that's what we want to feel when we're running as well. Naturally, running is going to tax your systems and your body a little more just by nature of running and moving a little quicker. But ideally, we want to try to conserve the parts again and try to minimize the wear and tear on that. One way you can address this is all great. This is all conceptual. Thinking about trying to use more of your foot when you're out there running. But how do you do that? One way you can kind of approach that is by thinking about the length of your stride. Generally, when we get into trouble, it's because we have bad posture and we sit into our bucket seat and we're not really in an efficient position to move ourselves forward. So just like the box, we have to continue to add force to the system to keep this body, to keep this object moving forward. So you just have to push harder, pull harder, and use more force to keep this object moving. So you end up in this bucket seat, sloppy and tired, and to keep moving forward, you have to push and pull and try to take longer strides, and it's just this whole muscular activity. But when you're in your bucket seat, really the only natural position to go from bucket seat is to extend your leg in front of yourself, and you end up landing out in front of yourself, in front of your center of gravity. And every time you do that, your body is coming into the ground and it's creating almost a braking motion. It is creating a braking force. There's all this frictional force, and your body's coming into the ground as opposed to just skimming over top of it, which you're going to come into the ground a little bit anyway, but again, you try to minimize that pounding and that movement into the ground. So what we want to do is try to minimize that extension in front of our body. We want to shorten our stride, so to speak. So when we're out there running, one thing that you can practice is play with your stride length. Always have good posture, but you're running along. Use as much of your foot as possible. And try taking really long strides. Try to overextend your stride so that it's exaggerating how big your stride gets. And then go the other way. Try to take really tiny steps, which forces you up more on your forefoot when you're trying to cut your stride. And then just let the leash out a little bit so that you're not up on your forefoot taking baby steps, but you're able to just kind of settle into a shortened stride than you're probably used to. But it helps keep your feet underneath your center of gravity more, so you're not creating that break, which also allows you to really minimize that heel strike and that heel impact and that heel instability when you're out in front of yourself like that. Posture, good reset, keep your hips underneath of you, and stride. Think about your stride. Think about, is it out in front of you? Is it too long? Is it too short? Is it tight? Is it relaxed? Are you using all of your foot? Where are you at on your foot? But really stride, posture, stride. If you kind of keep those two catchphrases, keywords in the back of your brain when you're out there. And again, your body loves to learn by experience. So try the spectrum. Try long stride, short stride. Try forefoot, heel stride. Kind of use your body to experiment and find that happy medium. Find where it feels good. more often than not, what you've been doing is going to feel the best. So any change is going to feel a little awkward, but start to play around with it. Start to experiment a little bit with it. Again, like I said before, change isn't easy. Muscle memory is pretty embedded, particularly with something like running and movement. So it's not going to come easy. It's not going to come overnight. But I will say there's certain things that will affect the enjoyability of your run right away, and that's posture. If you can practice doing a little posture reset, or maybe you're good at you got a good set of core muscles and you're able to adjust and pull your hips underneath of you without putting your arms over your head, that's great as well. But think about your hip positioning. Learn to reset your posture throughout the day, throughout your run. And I promise you, when you're out there running, this is still the thing, even though for as many years as I've talked about this and taught it, knowing it is one thing, you have to actually keep doing it. And that's the one thing that I said right off the bat is no matter how fast or how long you've been running, you still get tired when you run. And when you get tired, your posture breaks down. It's just the way it is. So you have to always be a little bit of mentally engaged with that so you can make the adjustments and get your body back in a good posture position. And I didn't talk too much about it, but your core is what holds that, right? So again, another super not fun thing to do is do core exercises. But that's really the crux of what holds your whole body upright and holds everything together. So strengthening your core is never a bad thing. So again, posture, stride. Jot down your questions. Go out and practice it a little bit. You can practice it stationary. You can practice it on the run. Try a couple of things that I suggested, and we can chat about it a little further when we meet again on Saturday. But be patient with yourself. Again, this is not an easy thing to change the way you move at all. So enjoy it. This in no way is working on your form meant to be stressful or not enjoyable. Hopefully you feel little differences when you're out there trying it. But most of all, the whole point of this is to make your running potentially more fun, give you a little bit more longevity, a little less wear and tear. So hopefully you're able to experience that as well. And stay safe, stay well, stay home, and I will talk to you all on Saturday. All right, take care. Thank you.